The quiet mountains of Idaho, there is a story that still sends chills down the spine of anyone who hears it. A story about a little boy, just 2 years old, who vanished into thin air while surrounded by his family. No sound of struggle, no footprints, no clues, just gone. His name was DeOrr Kunz Jr., and his disappearance in the summer of 2015 remains one of the most haunting mysteries in modern American history. It was July 10, 2015. DeOrr Kunz and Jessica Mitchell wanted a short camping trip in the Idaho wilderness. They packed up their truck with supplies, brought along their 2-year-old son DeOrr, and set out for Timber Creek Campground, a remote spot 2.5 hours away from their home in Idaho Falls. They weren't alone. Jessica's elderly grandfather, Robert Bob Walton, came along, and so did a friend of the family, Isaac Reinwand. Together, the 5 of them drove deep into the mountains, heading toward a place surrounded by forests, rivers, and endless rugged land. That night at camp, everything seemed normal. They lit a fire, roasted marshmallows, and enjoyed the mountain air. DeOrr, wearing his little camouflage jacket, blue pants, and cowboy boots, carried his toy monkey and blanket. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a family enjoying a peaceful trip in the woods. The morning of July 10, 2015, seemed ordinary at the Timber Creek Campground. The sunlight broke through the trees, the sound of the river filled the air, and the family prepared for a quiet day in the mountains. Jessica and Vernal decided to head toward a small creek to fish. It wasn't far from camp, and they believed their 2-year-old son would be safe under the watchful eye of his great-grandfather, Robert Walton. After all, they were just a few steps away, and the area felt calm and peaceful. But in the wilderness, peace can change to panic in an instant. When Vernal and Jessica returned a short while later, they expected to see their little boy playing nearby, maybe with his toy monkey, maybe dragging his favorite blanket along the ground. Instead, there was silence. They called out his name. Nothing. They checked around the camper. Still nothing. At first, they thought it was a simple game of hide and seek. Maybe he had wandered a few feet away and was waiting to be found. But as the minutes passed, that light-hearted idea quickly turned to fear. Jessica later described the moment with chilling words. He was just gone. They rushed toward the creek, scanning the banks, terrified that he might have slipped into the water. But there were no ripples, no clothing, no sign of a child ever being there. The woods were searched next. Trees towered over them, shadows stretching in every direction. They shouted his name into the wilderness, but the only sound that came back was the echo of their own voices. Time ticked by. Minutes felt like hours, and soon a horrifying realization began to sink in. DeOrr wasn't just missing. He had vanished, completely. By 2:30 p.m., Jessica made the desperate 911 call. Her voice cracked as she told dispatchers that her little boy was gone. Help was on the way, but the Timber Creek Campground was so remote that it would take nearly 2 hours for rescue teams to arrive. 2 long hours. Alone, with no idea where their son had gone. Because the campground was so isolated, it took nearly 2 hours for search and rescue teams to arrive. But once they did, the area came alive with activity. Helicopters circled overhead. Divers searched the river. Dogs sniffed the ground for any trace of DeOrr's scent. Volunteers and law enforcement spread through the thick woods, calling his name. For days, the search continued. Hundreds of people scoured the wilderness. Yet not a single trace of the boy was ever found. Not a footprint. Not a piece of clothing, nothing. The area around Timber Creek is massive. More than 4 million acres of forest. It is home to dangerous wildlife. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. Some believed that perhaps one of these animals had taken the child. But even if that were true, there should have been signs. Tracks, blood, shreds of clothing. But there were none. As time passed, suspicion began to grow. Investigators started noticing that the stories told by Vernal and Jessica didn't always match. Sometimes their details changed. Sometimes they contradicted each other. They also mentioned seeing other campers that morning. Yet those campers later said they had no memory of meeting them, or of ever seeing DeOrr at all. Then came the polygraph tests. Both parents failed, and then months later, something even more unsettling was discovered. The camouflage jacket that DeOrr was said to be wearing on the day he vanished was found inside a storage unit rented by Jessica. How could it have been there? If the boy had been wearing it in the mountains? In the days following the disappearance, investigators poured everything into finding little DeOrr. But the deeper they searched the forest, the more unsettling the case became. For all their efforts, hundreds of people combing the ground, divers dragging the river, helicopters scouring the landscape, not a single trace of the boy could be found. And so, suspicion began to creep in. Investigators turned their attention to the people closest to DeOrr, his parents, Jessica Mitchell and DeOrr Kunz. At first, both had been seen as desperate, grieving parents. But as time went on, cracks began to appear in their stories. Jessica and DeOrr described meeting other campers that morning, strangers who, they claimed, had spoken to them and even seen DeOrr. But when authorities tracked down those supposed witnesses, they told a very different story. They remembered meeting the adults, but they had no memory of ever seeing a little boy with them. That was the first red flag. Then came the inconsistencies. In interviews, details shifted. Timelines didn't match. Sometimes the parents' accounts contradicted each other entirely. At first, investigators assumed it was the stress of trauma. But as the contradictions piled up, it became harder to ignore. Both parents were eventually asked to take polygraph tests. The results? They failed. Not once, but multiple times. The most disturbing discovery, however, came months later. In a storage unit rented by Jessica, investigators uncovered a piece of clothing. The camouflage jacket DeOrr had reportedly been wearing on the very day he vanished. That single discovery sent shockwaves through the case. If DeOrr had been wearing that jacket in the woods, how could it possibly end up tucked away in storage? Theories began to change. No longer was the forest the main suspect. Now the suspicion turned inward, to the family itself. Investigators publicly named Jessica and DeOrr as suspects in their own son's disappearance. Meanwhile, the great-grandfather, Robert Walton, and the family friend Isaac Reinwand were listed as persons of interest. And yet, despite all of this, there was never enough solid evidence to charge anyone with a crime. The case sat in a chilling limbo, between accident and foul play, between tragedy and cover-up. The wilderness, it seemed, wasn't the only place filled with shadows. The case has inspired countless theories, each more chilling than the last. The wilderness theory. Some believe DeOrr wandered off into the wild and became lost. But with hundreds of people searching, how could not even a single clue have been found? The animal attack theory. Others think a wild predator may have taken him. But again, no tracks, no blood, no clothing, nothing. The stranger theory. A darker idea is that someone else at the campground, or even passing through, may have kidnapped DeOrr. But no one reported seeing suspicious activity that day. The staged trip theory. Perhaps the most unsettling of all, private investigators hired by the extended family have suggested that something may have happened to the boy before the camping trip even began, and that the trip itself was staged to cover up what really occurred. None of these theories can be proven. Each one leaves behind unanswered questions. As the years have passed, the mystery has only deepened. The search has stopped and started again many times. Volunteers, law enforcement, and even private investigators have tried to piece together the truth. But DeOrr remains missing. In 2023, his grandmother released a message to the public. In it, she asked people to continue praying, to continue hoping, and to never forget the little boy who disappeared. And so, the case of little DeOrr Kunz remains a mystery, frozen in time. A child surrounded by family vanished in broad daylight, and left behind nothing but questions. Was it the wilderness? Was it something darker? Or is the truth buried much closer than anyone wants to believe? Until answers are found, this disappearance will continue to haunt both investigators and all who hear the story. But DeOrr's case is not the only mystery that refuses to be solved. There are countless others, strange vanishings, chilling encounters, and stories that will leave you unsettled long after the video ends. Keep watching the Witness Archives, where the unknown is never far away and every story is a reminder that some mysteries were never meant to be forgotten.